In Chihuahua, Mexico, a man named Lalo Salamanca resided. On the surface, he appears someone full of charm, charisma, and a person who spreads positive energy.
Hey guys! Oh! Hey!
He takes good care of his housekeepers and guards, he helps out the people in his city financially, and he always has a smile on his face. However, this same smile is no more than a mask that deceives his victims, as he carries out some of the most evil acts of terror. Murder, manipulation, and torture are all too common for Lalo, and his depth of skills allowed him to evade capture for years. And in this video, I want to break down his psychology and explore the dark mind of Lalo Salamanca.
So, who's Lalo?
Me? Nobody.
You said fucking Lalo Salamanca!
So, tell me what happened.
Lalo Salamanca is going to die.
You know what happened? Men came, armed men, in the middle of the night, to my home, trying to get to me. You know what they did? They killed people I care about. Butchered.
We had a monster in custody. We just let him walk right out of jail. We failed. The whole system just failed. This guy killed a 22-year-old kid, dead in cold blood. It's wrong.
You scammed the judge. And for what? To get a murdering cartel psychopath back out on the street?
Lalo Salamanca's dead.
Don Eladio, adivine quién. Soy yo, Lalo, y estoy vivo.
The first time we see Lalo on screen, he's clearly an energetic and positive person, blaring loud music and making food for his new co-worker.
Llegaste aquí justo a tiempo. Hold on 1 second. You are going to love this.
Lalo, prior to this, was operating as a drug lord down in North Mexico, but due to his uncle, Don Hector, having a stroke leaving him wheelchair bound, Lalo would replace him, taking charge of the Salamanca drug operation in the US. The man who he made the food for was Nacho Varga, who'd been working under Hector and would now be under Lalo, and even he is bamboozled by the clear difference in personality between Hector and Lalo. Hector had a hasty aura, constantly miserable and often aggressive. Lalo, on the other hand, is the complete opposite, trying to lighten up the mood and bring in energy to a somewhat mundane operation. This theme carries on throughout, and it's almost believable that Lalo is a good person. When we see him go back to his hacienda, he introduces Nacho to his staff, and there seems to be some mutual love and respect there. Then he later visits a couple named Mateo and Sylvia, and it's revealed that he'd paid for Mateo to have his teeth fixed.
¿Cómo va Mateo de los dientes? ¿Ya mejor?
Sí, su dentista trabajó tanto. Antes Mati pasaba la noche entera sin dormir por el dolor. Ahora duerme como bebé. Gracias a usted, don Eduardo.
Qué bueno, sí.
And even his charm and seduction, as he travelled to Germany and spoke to a woman at a bar, with her clearly taking a liking to him, and if it wasn't for the fact that she'd recently lost her husband or he wasn't flying home the next day, he would have charmed her into bed that same night.
I'd like to invite you in. When do you fly home?
Tomorrow.
Well, in another life.
In another life, yes.
Seeing all of these qualities on first impression can make one believe that Lalo could work a regular job, perhaps as a salesman or maybe even a mechanic, as he's seen constantly working on his 1970s Chevrolet Monte Carlo. But the primary reason he's ended up in the cartel is because of one man. Hector Salamanca was the head of the Salamanca family in terms of crime. He, alongside Juan Bolsa and Eladio Fuente, started the Juarez cartel in North Mexico decades prior. According to Hector, it was the Salamanca money and blood that went into starting the cartel, and he even bought Don Eladio his hacienda.
Me and my family, we built this whole business. Salamanca money, Salamanca blood, that hacienda, I pay for it!
His passion for this displays his pride in the Salamanca name, and this may be why he makes the decision to turn his nephews to a life of crime, just like himself. Hector's nephews Marco and Lionel were twin brothers that were taught a harsh lesson by Hector as kids, as Hector attempted to drown Marco until Lionel hit Hector hard enough for him to stop. He did this just to teach them that family is all. With supposedly more grooming from Hector over time, the two of them would then grow up to become murderous cartel hitmen and enforcers, with absolutely zero remorse for the people they took the lives of. Hector's nephew Tuco would also become a key figure in the cartel north of the border, and he too was mentally troubled.
Colombian neckties. I cut their throats and then I pull their long tongues through the slits.
Hector had another nephew named Joaquin who became involved in the cartel, and finally, following the same fate as his cousins, was Lalo. There's a clear contrast between Lalo and his other cousins. He's clearly the most happy and extroverted out of them, and is more charming as opposed to scary, unlike the others. However, he would still suffer the same fate, being groomed by his uncle, becoming desensitized to death and murder, and taking up a prominent role in the cartel as a don. At some point in his younger adult years, he assisted Hector in torturing a hotel manager before burning him to death along with the building.
¿Saben qué estaba pensando esta mañana? En el olor a cuero y pelo de caballo quemado. ¿Se acuerdan? Hotel Tulipán. Fue tan amable con ese güey. Y él le dio la espalda. Armó todo ese desmadre solo para demostrar que no le tenía miedo. Era profesor antes de abrir ese lugar, ¿se acuerdan? Siempre lo decía, el gran profesor de la universidad. Se tomó su tiempo con él y su esposa escuchaba en la habitación de al lado. Ese pendejo estaba tan orgulloso de su hermoso español y sus libros y sus antigüedades. Pero igual cuando todo se perdió en llamas, olía a mierda.
He cheerfully tells his story with a grin on his face, finding amusement in the fact someone had to experience hell before meeting their maker. At some point between his birth and that moment, Hector had made Lalo believe that murder and torture are nothing more than getting the job done in this line of work. This is enhanced later on when Lalo makes it evident that Hector is the one that taught him these violent tendencies.
Lo voy a lastimar, los voy a lastimar como usted me dijo y después lo voy a matar, tío.
The combination of being both charming and ruthless made Lalo one of the most dangerous out of all of his cousins, as he could fit into any environment and evade suspicion before taking out his victims, unlike his family who raised alarm bells just from their presence. And perhaps because of this, he was promoted to the highest out of his cousins, and after Hector suffered the stroke, Lalo became the don of the Salamanca crime family and continued a mission that Hector can no longer partake in. Hector and fellow cartel member Gustavo Fring had bad history, mainly of Hector's doing. Many years ago, Gus, alongside his business partner Maximino, would attempt to convince the cartel to distribute meth instead of cocaine. After feeling they disrespected the cartel in the way they proposed it, Hector shot Max in the head, killing him instantly. Gus was allowed to live on Don Eladio's orders due to some connections he had back in Chile, and he joined the cartel despite Hector opposing this idea. Ever since, there was animosity between the two of them, especially when Gus had expanded and started to bring in more money than Hector. So after the stroke and now being paralyzed, only being able to communicate using his finger, and after being put in a care home, he becomes worried about what Gus would do now that Hector's no longer in full control. So that's where Lalo's importance comes into play. Unbeknownst to Hector or Lalo, Gus had been using engineers to construct an underground super lab to produce meth, without the cartel knowing. But Hector was suspicious that Gus was doing something, and passed his suspicion onto Lalo.
¿Por qué estás en el norte?
Para proteger los intereses de mi familia.
¿Siguiendo a los hombres de Gustavo? ¿Espiándolo?
Mira, pido disculpas. Sí, eso fue influencia de mi tío. Ya sabes cómo se pone Héctor de desconfiado y de irracional.
Lalo starts spying on Gus, and that's when the hunt begins. One of Gus's men, Mike Ermentrout, had been taking chase of a German engineer, Werner Ziegler. Lalo struggles to keep up with the chase, but manages to notice Mike had been in a money transfer office named TravelWire. Lalo goes inside and attempts to manipulate the young employee named Fred to give him the information on Werner or Mike, but his queries came to no avail.
So I was wondering if there's maybe something that, my friend missed.
I showed him everything I've got.
Show me what you showed him.
Maybe you should just call your friend.
I did. And, he told me to come back and take another look. I'd really appreciate it.
I can't. I'm sorry. You better just call the police.
So Lalo takes matters into his own hands, and when Fred turns around to take a call, Lalo somehow manages to quietly climb through the roof panel and jump back down again on the other side of the glass, now pointing a gun at Fred. At this point, Lalo could have easily coerced Fred into giving him the information. Not many people's job, especially not Fred's, is important enough to die for, and now at gunpoint he probably would have been willing to give answers, but Lalo doesn't take this route. Instead, he brutally beats Fred to death. He watches the camera footage to give him clues on Werner and Mike's whereabouts, and once he has his information, he burns down the building, along with Fred's corpse. Lalo is clearly disturbed. Fred Whalen was in his 20s and his murder was unjustified. Perhaps Lalo wants to leave no witnesses to any crimes he does. But instead of at least shooting him with the gun in hand to quickly put him down, it's later revealed on his autopsy that Fred died from blunt force trauma to the head. leaving his skull fractured. It's easy to assume, well, Lalo didn't use the gun as he didn't want to draw attention before he could watch the footage. But throughout the show, Lalo is constantly seen having a silencer attachment on hand to kill his victims swiftly and quietly. So the fact he chose to brutally beat Fred opposed to a quick shot draws me to exploring Lalo's sadism. Now, there's still a lot of actions yet to be covered, so this isn't everything, but it gives us a viewpoint to assess his past and future actions. The chief component of sadistic personality is taking pleasure in cruel, demeaning, and aggressive behaviors as a means of control. Criteria for the condition was listed in the DSM-3R as a pervasive pattern of at least 4 of the following, which had emerged by adolescence. We see obvious signs of Lalo in here already, such as amusement from witnessing the psychological or physical pain of others. He rejoiced in the memory of torturing the hotel manager with Hector and burning his body, even keeping a bell from the hotel as a souvenir or trophy. This could also be considered fascination with violence, weapons, and torture/injury. We also don't know what he did to Fred before murdering him. Presumably nothing, as he was short on time, but it was off camera, so we just don't know. All we know is that he was beaten to death. However, his actions only got worse from here, and he definitely ticks off more of this criteria as the story proceeds, so I'm going to put it aside for now, but keep this criteria in mind. Another condition to take a look at is Lalo's psychopathy. Correctly named antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD for short, it's a personality disorder characterized by impulsive, irresponsible, and often criminal behavior. Someone with ASPD will typically be manipulative, deceitful, and reckless, and will not care for other people's feelings. The founding psychopathy psychologist Robert Hare devised a checklist with 20 items on it. Each item gets ranked on a scale of 0 to 2, based on the severity of the criteria in the person being examined. And when the patient is assessed and their scores get added up, the number has to surpass 30 out of 40 to be deemed as suffering with ASPD. When doing my own assessment of Lalo, I had results that may surprise you. So in terms of criteria he fits, there's many obvious ones like pathological lying as shown with Fred, or an obvious lack of remorse or guilt in the way that he and Hector reminisce over the torture and murder of the hotel manager. But there's ones that he surprisingly doesn't do. For example, glibness or superficial charm. They would be present if this was all an act from Lalo, but he's seemingly just himself at most times. His charm is authentic even when he's lying. Or there's also how he isn't impulsive. He's a very thought through and calculated individual. But after a full assessment, Lalo only scores 17 out of 40, meaning he wouldn't be classed as a psychopath in my opinion. However, this doesn't mean his future actions wouldn't suggest anything more than him still being evil. So returning to the chase of Mike and Werner, he failed to catch up, but after calling the hotel that he found out Werner was staying at, he managed to find out some small details about the construction project whilst pretending to be one of Gus's men.
This is Werner?
Yes? Who is this?
I'm calling on behalf of Gustavo Fring.
Ah, yes.
Is Mr. Fring very upset?
What do you think?
Please let him know the work will continue. Did Michael show him my letter? I explained everything.
No. Michael hasn't shared that with Mr. Fring.
The letter has specific instructions. My men will be able to continue a few days without me. The work will go on. Ask Michael.
Michael's very busy, and he asked me to speak with you. Do you remember what your instructions were?
Certainly. They are to finish clearing the debris, then begin the south wall.
That's the south wall?
The south wall? Yes.
So he now had more intel on Gus's construction project, but before he could get deeper into the investigation, he's arrested for the murder of Fred. Prior to this, however, he had connected with sketchy lawyer Saul Goodman to help him with one of his dealers getting arrested. Now he'd asked Saul Goodman to represent him in this case and tried to get him bail. Being a murder charge, this would have been incredibly hard, but using his sketchy abilities, Saul manages to get it done. Even in the courtroom, Lalo shows little remorse or care to the presence of Fred's grieving family.
Who's that?
It's gotta be his family. Fred Whelan. The guy who died at the TravelWire.
His bail was set for $7 million. But lucky for him, that's the cartel's chump change. Also, he'd undergone this court process under the alias Jorge de Guzman, a fake name that prevented the courts from tying him to the Salamanca crime family. Otherwise, he had no chance at bond. He gets Saul Goodman to retrieve the money and pay his bail, and to evade further issues, he flees to Mexico, taking Nacho with him. At Lalo's Hacienda, he reunites with his staff, as mentioned in chapter 1. His cook, his gardener, and his trusted guards all embrace him, and outside of his family, these seem to be the only people he genuinely cares about. At the Hacienda, when there's no cartel business going on, we see a side of him that shows he's not always ruthless and violent. He can be relaxed and loving. Later into the night, Nacho finds Lalo sitting outside on his own, and Lalo opens up about his sleeping habits.
Another night owl, huh? You don't sleep?
Not tonight.
Yeah, I never sleep much. An hour, maybe 2. It's enough.
This might suggest that Lalo suffers with a severe case of insomnia. It's a common sleep disorder that can make it hard to fall asleep or stay asleep. It can also cause you to wake up too early and not be able to get back to sleep. He says he doesn't see it as a curse, and many other things can cause little sleep. Health conditions, medications, stress and anxiety could all contribute to only getting a few hours of sleep at night. You can function on 2 hours of sleep in the short term, but you won't be functioning anywhere near your best with other hours of rest you need, which is scary considering how sharp and skilled Lalo is, regardless of his short sleep. He asks Nacho to fetch him some alcohol from the kitchen, but shortly after he returns, a fire starts inside the house. Lalo originally blames his young guard Ciro, accusing him of using the stove to light his cigarettes, but seconds later, Lalo notices what appears to be hitmen outside, armed with guns, and he uses Ciro as a shield. Ciro is shot and killed, and Lalo is forced to defend himself against the mercenaries. After some excellent tactical awareness and abilities, Lalo manages to take out multiple hitmen all on his own. But after the smoke clears, Lalo assesses the scene, and he sees that his men have been killed. Instantly he manages to add up the dots, and realizes Nacho, who was now nowhere to be seen, must have collaborated with Gustavo Fring to take him out. However, the most important realization for him is that his cook, Yolanda, was murdered, shot in the back while she was trying to escape. This enraged Lalo like never before, and he would now dedicate the rest of his time to pursuing revenge. What Lalo proceeds to do next is quite frightening. Of course he plans on getting revenge, but it comes with a sacrifice, one that requires little to no remorse. His plan was to fake his own death so that the cartel and everyone involved believe he's dead, so he can plan an attack on Gus with his guard down. However, there are only so many ways you can fake your own death. But remember in chapter 1, I mentioned that there was a couple, Mateo and Sylvia, that Lalo had been a benefactor to, given the money to fix Mateo's teeth. Well, this had turned out to be more than a gesture of goodwill. This was actually put in place so Lalo could swap out his dental records with Mateo, should faking his death ever be a need. He approaches their place in a friendly manner, making conversation with the two and creating a seemingly positive environment.
Aquí está Don Eduardo.
Don Eduardo, qué gusto verlo. Ah, cabrón, yo nomás el hombre de la montaña. ¿Se te pareces a CC Top?
Arréglate para Don Eduardo. Báñate y rasúrate.
Ah, sí, claro.
But when Mateo goes to shave, leaving Sylvia alone with Lalo in the kitchen, he grabs a pair of scissors and murders her. Straight after this, he heads to the bathroom to murder Mateo. No matter how Lalo came up with this idea, whether it was advised by Hector or he came up with it himself, it still requires him to view Mateo than nothing more than disposable flesh to benefit himself. This further adds on to his psychopathic and sadistic nature. For one, he surely has no empathy or remorse for the couple, but on the sadism side, he lied and manipulated them in order to harm them. After mutilating Mateo's face beyond recognition and burning his body, is placed at the Hacienda and identified as Lalo's, causing the world to see him as dead. He was prepared to go back to the US and kill Gus as revenge, but after a call with Hector, he realizes that he'll need proof to bring back to the cartel as an explanation for killing him, so he has to change plans. However, he'd already paid the traffickers the money to smuggle him into the US. He demanded his money back as they hadn't actually moved yet, but when they denied giving it back, he took out his gun and murdered both of them, before allowing the rest of the attempting immigrants to have their money back. This moment again shows that contrast with Lalo, where one moment he's a murderous monster, but the next a considerate gentleman, even putting a stool down to allow them to leave the truck safely. It's not just a mode that he switches on or off, that's just Lalo at all times, a caring person deep down, but just a desensitization to death developed from his upbringing. In pursuit of his mission, he takes a trip to Germany, where at a bar, he tracked down the late Werner Ziegler's wife, Marguerite Ziegler, and sparked up a conversation.
I'm Ben.
Ben. Hello, I'm Margarete.
Oh, it's very nice to meet you, Margarete.
He used a fake name, fake reasoning, and manipulates Marguerite to believe that he's someone he isn't. He seduces her throughout the night, and they end up outside her place, but they don't go any further as he drops her off. However, now he knows her address. The next day when she leaves for work, he breaks into her house to look for any evidence that can help him find out more about Werner's construction. And he does, finding a gift from one of Werner's workers. So in this case, he'd use what's called dark manipulation. He's usually just himself in other situations, and most of the time he just hides the knowledge he has. But here, he's literally another person with another name, all with the aim of seducing Marguerite to extract confidential information from her and break into her house. He gets her to open up and be vulnerable despite not caring at all about her lost husband. Also, she didn't even sense a hint of danger, and that's just how likable and charming Lalo is. His retrieved information leads him to finding a Croatian man named Kaspar, who was part of Werner's construction team. Kaspar, of course frightened by an intruder, tries to hide. Lalo follows him and finds him inside. They tussled for a bit, but Lalo got the better of him, chopping off Kaspar's foot with an axe and asked him for information on the construction project. Kaspar gave Lalo the answers he needed, and despite not being shown on the screen, It's assumed Lalo then murdered Caspar in order to not leave him as a witness. With the proof now in his hand, his last trip would be to visit Gus back in the US. Somehow getting back to Albuquerque, Lalo starts living out of a car, presumably stolen, to evade being noticed by the law. They think he's dead, so one sighting of him could blow everything up and stop his plans. But then we see how dedicated he is to catching Gus. After getting his 1 hour of sleep, he heads down a manhole into the sewers and navigates them to find a location where he can scope out a laundromat owned by Gustavo Fring as a cover, and the location his assumed superlab is being built under. He then starts recording a vlog for Don Eladio, exposing that he knows what Gus is up to and his plan for retribution.
Y le puedo decir lo que está allá adentro. Un hoyo grande, donde un ingeniero alemán, Werner Ziegler, diseñó el lugar perfecto para esconder el mother of all meth labs.
Y bueno, esa es mi historia. Y Fring seguramente va a tener la suya y seguramente va a ser muy buena. Así que hoy en la noche voy a entrar ahí. Voy a matar a todos sus guardias y le voy a enseñar la evidencia.
Y ya después, usted decide. Adiós.
His mental resilience to not just find and kill Gus after what he did, but to stake out his operation and gain all the proof in order to make it right by the cartel, proves Lalo's lack of impulsivity and rather his calculated and cool head. Shortly after this, he tries to call Hector, but after hearing a crackling sound on the phone, he realizes the lines have been tapped, presumably by Gus, and for once we see Lalo crack slightly, with a short burst of anger. But when Lalo looks up, he sees a cockroach crawling through the sewer, which reminds him of Saul Goodman.
Your man, he's like the cucaracha, you know? Born survivor.
He had created this plan to use Saul as a distraction and cause a diversion, so he drove to Saul's apartment. But when he got there, Saul and his wife Kim were joined by a fellow lawyer, Howard Hamlin. The couple was stunned by Lalo's appearance, believing he was dead, and pleading for Howard to leave. Lalo stated, "I'm here to talk to my lawyers," before shooting Howard in the head, murdering him instantly. An innocent civilian who had no involvement, an innocent civilian who had a family, a career, and a life to live, lost his life just from being a witness to Lalo's existence. Even after Saul and Kim cry and scream at the frightening scene they just witnessed, Lalo, unfazed, tries to calm them down, even rolling his eyes as if he's disappointed at how scared they are, showing how deeply desensitized he truly is. He gets the pair to sit and runs through the plan. One of them will drive to Gus's personal home and shoot Gus. However, Lalo knows that Gus has security present and wouldn't get shot, but this would draw Mike and his security team away from the laundromat to prioritize protecting Gus, allowing Lalo to then sneak in and expose the lab. Kim's the one that ends up being sent to Gus's home whilst Lalo ties up Saul in the apartment, and when he does, he goes over how distraught he was left after his house was attacked.
They killed people I care about. Killed my cook, my gardener, 17-year-old kid I knew since he was knee-high, never heard a fly. Butchered my housekeeper, Yolanda. They shot her in the back.
It's interesting how he's able to comprehend the idea that killing innocent people hurts the people left behind, when he does the same thing to Fred Whalen. He could have offered Fred a lot of money, he could have held him at gunpoint and forced him to delete the camera footage, but he chose to murder that young man with his life ahead of him. He also murdered Mateo and Sylvia, and who knows how many family members they had that would have to bereave their deaths at the hands of Lalo. Even just before this scene, he murdered Howard, who again is innocent. So he understands the feeling himself, but not the feelings of others. It's quite ironic, and this makes him seem narcissistic and arrogant, but it just shows how little empathy he truly has. Anyway, just like he planned, Mike and his team left the laundromat, allowing Lalo to get inside. But before he could gather all the evidence, a suspicious Gus and two of his security men arrive at the laundromat, joining a third who was already there. Gus suspiciously studies the room, but seconds later, Lalo pops out and kills all three of Gus's men, leaving Gus alone, perfectly in Lalo's hands, ready to expose to Don Eladio. He once more takes out his camera to continue his expose film for Don Eladio, and with Gus at gunpoint, gets him to take them on a tour, with Lalo talking to Eladio during the walk.
Ay, Don, cómo me hubiera gustado no tener que apresurarnos tanto. Podríamos estar al lado de su alberca, pellejando a esta víbora, pulgada por pulgada. Tomarnos nuestro tiempo,
pasarla bien. Pero, pues se aparece aquí ahora y ¿quién soy yo para despreciar un regalo?
He explicitly states that torturing Gus would be fun, showing torture is something he enjoys, hence the accusation of sadism, even indirectly proving it's not just something Lalo himself has an interest in, but Eladio also, and we know that Hector has an interest in torture also. So this shows that Lalo probably isn't naturally a sadist, but just due to his upbringing, he's been molded into one. Gus leads Lalo into where the lab is, which Lalo catches on his camera. However, despite being a master manipulator and a great planner, he couldn't foresee Gus's own manipulation and planning. Gus tells Lalo he can't kill him before he tells Eladio what he thinks of him. Lalo, of course, amused by this and excited to hear what Gus has to say, spares him a minute, giving Gus enough time to talk and distract before kicking a power cable to switch off the lights. Lalo shoots into the darkness, aiming at where he believes Gus is, but then he's hit in the neck with a bullet. Gus turns the light on to find Lalo on the floor, blood pouring out his mouth, letting out a laugh as his last breath before he dies. The chase was over, the game was over, and in the following years, every Salamanca would end up dead, meeting a similar fate to Lalo. Though his death prevented him from raining down further terror on people, there were long-lasting effects of his crimes. Fred Whalen's family would mourn for years over the loss of their boy. Howard Hamlin's fate would be even worse. He had some controversy around his name regarding drug use that was completely false, but now he was murdered and couldn't defend himself. Mike and his cleanup crew had to do something to keep the heat off the business, so they framed Howard's suicide, and usually because of Lalo, that's the reputation that he had to leave behind. Ironically, Lalo and Howard would be buried together, underneath the laundromat, a few feet under the super lab that Gus would continue to build. Howard's murder also led to Saul and Kim breaking up, and Kim retiring from her career as an attorney due to the guilt of them having a part to play in it, and of course, the trauma.
It's that fucking Lalo Salamanca! That psychopath came back from the dead and he walked through that door. He did this, not us, him!
Mateo, Sylvia, Caspar, even the hotel manager, and everyone else off camera that Lalo had been involved with killing, all lost their lives just to further Lalo's progress in his missions, or just for Lalo's satisfaction and sadism. A twisted, sadistic psychopath who, despite being a charming and cheerful character, met a rightful end when being killed himself, but that still wouldn't be enough justice for the carnage left behind.
So, who's Lalo?
It's nobody.